Backfire.
Yes, it is. This is Backfire. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey.
Good morning.
Hey, Steve.
To another day of Backfire. Anyway, we had an exciting weekend this weekend. We all got in the Christmas parade and had the spirit.
I thought it was awfully nice of Main Street to hold this parade in our honor.
It was. It was nice of them.
And nice of all those folks to come out and say hello to us, cheer for us. It was more special because it was at the Christmas season, too. So,
that's true. Hopefully they got, a little bit of joy out of it, too.
I've been in this Christmas parade several years now, and I'm always amazed at the number of Cleveland people that come out and line the roads and bring their families and so forth and wave and cheer for the Christmas parade. It's really a great event for Cleveland.
We all get kind of cynical sometimes about all the shopping and the glitz and the commercialization of Christmas and so forth, but going through the parade, I was struck by the fact that you could really see genuine excitement and joy, particularly on the little kids there watching the parade, and that was really a good reminder about the innocence of childhood and something to be honored.
I agree. And let me say one thing, too. The Cleveland JCs used to actually sponsor the parade and put it on as a private organization. It takes a tremendous amount of work to put this together, and I think Sharon Marr and a lot of the people that work on this do a wonderful job to put it together, and it's a real benefit to the community.
Absolutely.
It is a benefit to the community. Main Street does a lot of great things that creates this downtown Christmas spirit and some of these stuff, and to keep the history of Cleveland here. And I think it's a wonderful thing that we've got such a great Main Street organization that, it has attracted, it has been able to keep a lot of businesses downtown and serve as a community. We're a community that we've spread out. We spread our wings, but we still have a downtown, and our downtown is pretty thriving and a lot of activity down there, so it's a good thing.
Yes.
Congratulations, Main Street.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas, everyone. I'll say that, too, since I've got the spirit from the parade. Well, we've had another good, interesting week, but there's been some local things happen here that we probably need to start talking about. First thing was the headline in the banner. I just kind of glimpsed and saw this, and it floored me that they're talking about merging government services. You think, of course, they've talked about it in years past too. I'd say, haven't they?
They have. What's
your opinion? I think both of you are for merging services. You're not against it. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I think I'm in favor of many of those mergers.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have to make sense to do it. John has used the example of allowing there to be one place that you could pay your property taxes. That just seems eminently sensible to me.
And again, Mike Smith at the county offered to make that happen. Mm-hmm. I hope that sometime in the future that can happen.
You look at the fire situation now. That would actually probably be incredibly difficult to merger, I would imagine.
At this point.
That's what I mean. At this point.
Now we could sell some of our trucks and we wouldn't need as many.
Well, that'd be great because we estimated them at one price. They came in $200,000 higher. Then we could turn around and sell them at a depreciated loss.
Yeah, right. Well, anyway, it's never too late. It's never too late. So if we needed to merge that would be good. The school systems, everyone says the school systems would.
Well, it's probably easier now to do it than it had been in the past because the wages and benefits are closer together than they were.
The per pupil expenditure was always the big thing that was hanging out over there because you had to bring the lower system up, and there's not as big a difference anymore. Now, I will say I'm for merging anywhere we can merge. Now, that's different from saying metropolitan government. There is a real concern among a lot of people in the county that they have representation and they not have someone over them with authority that they have no ability to vote in or out of office. So there's always a concern about who's in charge and what kind of redress does the citizen
have.
Well, with
metro government, the city government would essentially cease to exist.
Correct, but there are metro
There'd be
governments
one
have
government.
been, they've been problematic where they've been done. They've led to some pretty big budget problems.
Well,
So it's a
Nashville,
management
Nashville
issue.
would say that it's been a pretty big success for them, I think.
Well, the Nashville taxpayer may not, because it led to things like taxpayer subsidized sports stadiums that then went to the profit of the owners.
It also led to probably the healthiest economy in our state.
A lot of us think it might be Republican takeover and lowering of taxes and lessening of government regulation.
It's been that way. It's been that way for the last 10 years. So that goes across lots of different administrations.
Taking over.
Anyway, I'm glad that they're talking. It looks like the first thing it could possibly be something is the dogs and the cats. But
we already had consolidation and we gave it up. we deconsolidated.
That's just proof we can't get along. Put the dogs and cats back into place. Oh, I tell you, the dogs and the cats just keep going on. I was reading about this situation with one of our constables chasing a car or a motorcycle into Polk County. They're talking about the constables don't they don't fall under the Bradley County Sheriff's Department. They basically own
separate
it's a constitutional
offices.
Constitutional officer. Okay,
they're the second highest law enforcement official in the county under the sheriff.
Yeah. And, they were talking about chasing this motorcycle, had no tags on it, and they thought it was stolen, into the Polk County area, and Howard Thompson brought it up at the county commission meeting and said that, there was other issues there. But, a constable, any police officer, they should be able, if they, he contacted 911 services, the Polk County Sheriff's Department should have been alerted from the 911 services.
My understanding, they were notified. They didn't have somebody available to assist at that point in the area where the individual was going. I think the issue has more to do with the going over county line part than anything. Now, it is interesting that the Sheriff's Department has a protocol, and basically they don't engage in high-speed chases unless they have a good faith belief that a significant felony has occurred, because they think the risk to the public goes up dramatically in these chases, and the benefits don't outweigh the risk.
But now that is a county to county, department to department decision. Some departments across the state do engage in those chases. A lot of them don't, and there's an argument over. A lot of them will discontinue the chase on an armed bank robbery suspect based on that. And a lot of other people will look and go, how much damage is that kind of person on the loose going to do? So there's a lot of debate on how you handle that.
Well, and there's liability,
and that's a big part of the issue. If you chase somebody at 120 miles an hour and they slam into somebody,
pretty much. I may be wrong, but I think protocol now is, if they start chasing a car and they're in a high traffic area and start running at high speeds, they back off.
Well, now that's department to department.
That's the local protocol here.
Right.
Frankly, I just think it's the smarter thing to do in an urban area in particular.
But there is the argument, I don't disagree, but there is the argument that once that becomes the common norm, then criminals know all they have to do is engage in a high-speed chase and enter an urban area, and they're free.
Well, that doesn't mean they don't do other things. That doesn't mean that they don't send vehicles out ahead to try to do roadblocks and things of that nature. They just don't try to inflame the situation and create a hazard. For
technology has
certainly
been improved, so it should make it a lot easier to apprehend some of these people that are fleeing.
And once Cleveland starts flying its fleet of drones, they'll just be able to follow them everywhere.
Don't
laugh. That's probably
I'm not laughing. There's concern about the whole concept of the OnStar concept as well, because if the government can hack into your cell phone, I'm sure it can hack into your OnStar, which means they know where you're at and where you're going at all times.
Well,
there are a lot of, and Franklin and I, from opposite ends of the spectrum, might actually end up in some agreement over some concern, at least, over how we handle this. Technology is allowing us to become a very watched over society. One of the arguments, we talk about these traffic cams down here.
Right.
We're really way, way behind the curve on those traffic cams, and I don't mean that we should have them. What I mean is London, for example. There are traffic cams on all corners mounted up on the poles. Well, the problem with those cams is they're actually controllable from the headquarters, and they can roll those cameras all the way around, which means they can roll them around and look inside the building that it's sitting beside, or look inside the window of the building across the street. There are some real concerns with where society's going with all of this.
I think there's no question that we are in an era where we are all struggling to find the balance between security and privacy, and where the appropriate place is.
The signal light, the cameras on the signal lights. There was a lot of hoo-la-la going on about those things, and they finally took them down, I think, in the state of Tennessee.
Well, the big thing for me was, does it pay for itself? And most of them didn't, actually, without infringing on what we kind of considered reasonableness of the ticket itself.
Right. I know my wife, bless her heart, she'd be driving, and I'm telling you, she'd start braking a mile from a red light because she was going to make sure she didn't go through that thing while it was even turning yellow. And it would drive me crazy. I mean, we'd start stopping at Stewart School for the 25th Street red light. So, and then you got other people that they're scared to death, and they're going to fly through the thing and then think that,
right.
They're going to get a ticket in the mail. Anyway,
Let me say, I'm coming in the radio, one of the other stations, they do some headlines out of the free press. I know there are other stations. And I haven't looked at the story, but apparently there's a group that have placed billboards up condemning UT Medical Center in Chattanooga for having terrible doctors, and it's based on the fact that they train surgery residents on live pigs. I went through this when I was in dental school out in Memphis. Frankly, it just seems to me that at the hand of some of these radical, I hate to say progressives, because I don't know if that draws Franklin into this or not, but we are becoming a nation that is committing cultural and national suicide. The idea that a pig is more important than having a surgeon who actually has skills to do your surgery, it's just amazing to me. And of course, I morphed that over into these Georgetown and Columbia Law School students who are demanding delay of their finals because the grand jury cases in Ferguson and in New York have so upset them.
Is that not unbelievable?
They just can't do. Well, the fact of the matter, Brett Baer made a pretty good comment. He said, well, I hope these people after they graduate law school aren't so disturbed by current events that they can't properly present their case in court.
Franklin, what in the world are you thinking if you're going to be an attorney and things like that are said, my Lord? I mean, what kind of world are we raising?
Oh, young people frequently try to make statements. I think that's all it was.
Well, do you want to hear the statement they made?
Yeah, let's hear it. I want to hear it.
understand. I think there's a silliness to it.
A silliness.
But the point is they're going to be accommodated. The academic climate under the progressive rule that we have in this country is going to accommodate that. And when you accommodate it, you encourage it.
In the old days, before you read that, in the old days, if you didn't attend class,
a professor would have said, fine, you can take your test wherever you want to, and you're going to get an F.
That's
so
right.
Either come on the day it's scheduled or take an F.
That's right.
But they said,
I remember in law school one day that there was I don't even remember what the issue was because things change as you get older. But I remember Orrin Hatch was coming to our law school, and there was a group of students who boycotted their classes one day to draw attention to the fact that they disagreed
But
with
Franklin,
him.
that's here. I am great with that.
It's
I am
just-
fine with that because you know what
it's-
those students did? They took an action and they accepted personal responsibility for
I'm
their
okay
action.
with what you're
this
saying,
is not
Ron.
the same thing.
I'm
This
just saying
is
it's not-
demanding
it's-
accommodation.
It's just not that big.
Well,
a
here's
deal.
what they said. Your
That's what I'm saying.
silence is suffocating because apparently Georgetown Law didn't respond the way they wanted. They said, we, students of color, cannot breathe. At Georgetown University Law Center, law students of color are underserved, unacknowledged, and unable to seek relief from our institution of legal education. We may take courses in which we are never called on. Some of us remain unseen. The open letter reads, invisible. Many of us are consistently called the wrong name or the name of another person of color in the same class. These are commonplace experiences for people of color in the legal ivory tower. Now, these are students that are in Georgetown Law, probably one of the most prestigious law schools in the country, and we now have them whining and moaning that they're not getting enough out of life.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. Franklin says nothing.
Well, that bleeds into the
I mean,
study
I-
that the
look,
polling
look,
shows
look, let
after
me
6
ju-
years
let me
of
just-
this president,
let me just-
people feel like race relations are worse
let me
rather
just,
than better.
Let me just say something. First of all, whatever I think or don't think, there is something that's a little weird about three successful white guys sitting around talking about what black people are supposed to feel like. We don't have the first idea.
I'm not telling
No,
I'm
no,
not
I'm
telling them
just
how
saying-
to feel. I'm
I'm
telling them
just saying
suck it
it's
up.
it's a
the
little
world's not fair. Compete and get on with it.
You know.
That's all I'm saying.
There's winners and
I'm
there's
not talking
losers.
about what they feel, Franklin. I'm talking about the damn world's not fair.
No,
I
I'm just
can't
saying,
play basketball like Kobe Bryant does. Should I be whining that I didn't get an NBA contract?
Telling these folks how they ought to feel and what they ought to do when we don't have any of their
I'm not
experiences.
telling them what they ought to do. I'm telling them what they shouldn't do. When you've been accepted into Georgetown Law, you ought to feel pretty damn lucky about your place in the world and not whine and moan. And while we're on universities, let's talk about UVA's president who finds out that the rape allegation against a specific fraternity is completely, apparently untrue. And certainly the allegation that the other fraternities who weren't even named in it is not substantiated. And she says that she's very concerned about appearing to single groups out without any evidence, but she's going to continue to single groups out without any evidence, refusing to reinstate the fraternity system at UVA, even though we now know that the story is not holding up.
Do you think the left is going to be successful in trying to launch a Tea Party, their own Tea Party, Franklin?
Not likely.
They're saying, I was reading about this, it said the liberal insurgents say it's time to upend the Democratic Party. In other words,
It's not liberal enough for them.
Well, it is true that a significant number of the policies that the Democratic Party has pursued over the last 8 years are to the right of policies that were pursued 35 years ago.
The only ones
No
that are
doubt
to the
about
right
that.
are the cronyism.
Nah.
It's the Wall Street cronyism, which they were actually better at than we were, even though we get the blame for it. Now, they're excellent at putting our soldiers and our spies all around the world in danger over political stunts and not batting an eye at it.
What do you mean, John?
I'm talking about the Senate Intel report. The fact that this is a policy that was ended 7 years ago. It's a policy the Justice Department investigated 6 years ago and found no prosecutable crimes in. It's a policy that when Ms. Feinstein was asked, what about the agents that could possibly be attacked and killed because of this, she basically said, too bad.
Well, I doubt she said too bad.
Here's what she said.
But-
she said, yes,
but-
that is a concern, and yes, we're worried about that, but I have to do
but you
this.
know, there were Republicans who also supported the release of that
Not
report.
a single Republican in the committee participated on it. Not a single person. This is just like the UVA story. Not a single person who is accused by this report was even interviewed. Now, and then you get the basically political BS. They said, oh, well, the CIA wouldn't let us interview him. They opened them up for interview in 2012, so they've had over 2 years to interview these people.
That report specifically quotes instances of testimony given by CIA
None of them were
Senate.
interviewed. None of them were allowed. I tell you what, Franklin, next time you go to court, we'll be sure to make sure that none of your witnesses are allowed to actually testify in court. Would you find that to be fair?
It wasn't a court, John.
Franklin, you're telling me so it only applies in a courtroom, the idea of equality,
John,
idea of both sides being presented?
I'm not telling you that, John. What I am telling you is that the report is voluminous. I know that Michael Hayden disputes the report.
Not only Michael Hayden, Leon Panetta, all 4 of the previous directors
the report also reflects that there was significant disagreement in the CIA about what they were doing.
Well, there's significant disagreement in the Obama administration because not only did Chuck Hagel ask for it not to be released, but John Kerry, of all people, asked for it not to be released. And they released it anyway. And why did they do that? Because in about a week, they won't be the majority party anymore, and they just had to get their kicks in. Now, the real sad part about this, Dianne Feinstein, on average, has been somewhat of a hawk on these kind of issues.
Right.
But she's pissed because the CIA spied on her Senate committee. Mm-hmm. Now, we talked about this, and I thought it was wrong, and I thought it was troubling that they spied on the committee. But to turn around and put our diplomats and our spies in harm's way over a political pissing contest is wrong.
So we're talking. So everyone will know we're talking about the CIA.
They're calling it the torture report. The UN has now demanded that we prosecute people for war crimes.
Can I say something about this? I know I'm butting into to both of you in this nice debate you're having, but what really upsets me about this whole thing is $40 million spent on this investigation.
You're right.
That is absolutely crazy.
Well, first of all, the Congress has a significant role in exercising oversight over the actions of the executive branch. One of the things that is in this report that is interesting is that the report found that President Bush had been misled by the CIA and had not been given.
That's not what President Bush says.
I understand what he says, but there's a timeline in the report.
Can I say something else?
They actually said something in defense of President Bush.
We spent $40 million on this report, and everything that it reported, we knew what was going on.
No, we didn't.
What did we not know about? What did we not? Did we know they were being waterboarded?
What new ground was broken?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that reported was the number of people who had died in CIA custody during the interrogation.
Was it greater than the 3,500 people that died when the trade towers were brought down?
John,
was it heart attacks, old age?
Let me read you a really significant part of one of the rebuttals.
You know, it's been said that the greatest time of threat to liberty in America is always a time of war.
There's nothing like
Franklin. Here's the greatest thing: it's the hypocrisy. Let me read you a quote. This is from Jose Rodriguez, who was not questioned, but who actually ran the program. So they wrote a report, condemned the actions, but didn't even talk to the guy who actually was in charge of the program. This is his testimony. The interrogation program was authorized by the highest levels of the U.S. government, judged legal by the Justice Department, proved effected by any reasonable standard. The leaders of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees of both parties in Congress were briefed on the program more than 40 times between 2002 and 2009. But Representative Nancy Pelosi denied that and that she was told in 2002, but even though he briefed her personally. So both the Democrats and the Republicans were briefed on this from 2002 on. And now they're claiming, oh, we need to issue a report on it. They all agreed. They all signed off on it. It's okay to say we've stopped it. President Obama took credit for stopping it. President Bush actually stopped it before Obama even got into office. But this is nothing but a rehash and a kick at the CIA, and I understand her being mad. But I will tell you, when one of these CIA officers is killed somewhere in a foreign country, there's a couple of things. First off, that blood, in my opinion, is on Dianne Feinstein's hands. And secondly, what country is going to cooperate with us in the future? What CIA individual is going to put his neck on the line knowing that he may be thrown under the bus afterwards?
We've got the greatest country there is, and we're sitting here operating it and running it like a bunch of crazy people.
Well,
I mean,
politics
it's just
is
like
more important than national security.
it's just amazing to me how stupid we. $40 million on that report. That just blows my mind.
Well, the UN is now calling for the
Do you
people
know
to
what
be
the
prosecuted
CIA's
as war
budget
crimes.
is?
You
You know
know,
what the
you
CIA's
know what I-
40
budget
million
is?
is 40 million. I don't care how much more
I
they
don't
get.
care.
No,
It's a waste
and that's
of money.
not what I'm saying.
What's going
40
on with
million
Lois
spent.
Lerner? Where's that $40 million being spent? What's going on with
Well,
her?
the IRS's budget was just cut
By the way,
Senate
we
yesterday
now have new documents released,
in a bipartisan bill with the Democrats and the Republicans. I know that.
which the president threatened to veto when his own people were actually cooperating. But we now know that Lois Lerner met with Department of Justice officials before the 2010 election. And the important thing is she met with people from the public integrity section. The public integrity section would be the section charged with investigating IRS abuses. So we know they were actually implicated in the IRS abuses, and yet
Yeah, we
this
don't know what they discussed.
Actually,
Now,
we do.
Don't just jump ahead, John.
Frankly, let me ask you this:
Oh, well,
would
let me ask you
would
this.
that
Do you
violate
want that to be
the image of
investigated?
impropriety?
Do you
Would
want
it
that to-
violate the image of impropriety? Why would you not turn it over to an outside counsel? Eric Holder has refused to bring in an outside counsel on this, even though all the documentation shows his Justice Department is knee deep in it.
Eric Holder is a crook. So's Mr. Obama, I think. So I just love that moment of silence. New York flags 278 gun owners as mentally unstable. Andrew Cuomo urged lawmakers to pass the SAFE Act quickly.
Okay. Isn't that what John's been arguing for?
Well, it is, and
It
that's
depends
fine.
on how they do it. I brought this up in some of my presentations. For example, if you came back from Iraq and you were impaired, physically impaired,
Yeah.
all they looked at was the fact that you were labeled medically impaired, and they denied you the ownership of your guns.
Right.
That is a power grab. So it has to be done reasonable. It has to be done fairly. You've also got problems. For example, New Jersey passed this draconian law on gun ownership, and I've brought this up before. You've got a black single mother who's working as a phlebotomist from Philadelphia, 2 children. She travels across the New Jersey line, realizes she has her gun with her, which is legal in Pennsylvania under Pennsylvania law. She has a permit for it, everything. New Jersey law requires you to disclose to a police officer whether you have a gun. I don't know what she got pulled over for, a traffic violation or a roadblock, but she discloses it. The prosecutor is now looking to put her in prison for 4 years for that. Now, this is the same prosecutor who gave judicial diversion to the NFL football player Rice for knocking his girlfriend unconscious, but he won't give this single mother of 2 a diversion for an admitted simply crossing a state line where 2 laws don't coincide. He's going to send her to prison for 4 years.
That sounds like that.
So when
Mexican
people ask why gun owners
border.
are paranoid of the government, it's cases like that make us paranoid of the government. And that's why when we see Cuomo doing these things, we get very concerned about how it's being done.
I think it needs to be done, but I'm like you. You've got to really put emphasis on. Cuomo has already proven to me he's a nut.
Well, that law was stupid to begin with. There was a 7
I don't think
round
Cuomo-
ban on magazines, and they forgot to put an exclusion in for the police. So all the police, when they passed that law, were actually in violation of the law.
I don't think Cuomo's smart enough to put anything in place.
Well, 278 people being identified in the whole state of New York.
I'm not saying there's
Doesn't seem
anything
to be
wrong.
much of an overreach by government.
Well, gee, Franklin, it seems like I remember all you good liberal lawyers talking about one miscarriage of justice was more than enough. Now 274 is acceptable to you?
John, I just said, first of all, this is an idea that you championed in this discussion when all these shootings
What I said
were
was
going
the
on.
NRA had
You
talked about
said
this
that-
for years.
You said that that's where we need to focus.
And I didn't argue with
so
this,
they
other than I
focused
said
on
I'm
that.
concerned
And when
with
they
how it's being
implement it
done.
in the entire state of New York that has about 20 million people, they've identified 278 people
Correct.
who were considered to be mentally unstable.
I
would
just
think
wanna
that
make-
would be
I just
Great
want to
news.
Franklin, I just want to make sure it's done fairly.
Does that seem unfair to you on the surface?
You know, Franklin, the number doesn't tell me anything about the fairness.
In the article that you're reading says people who were deemed
Franklin,
mentally unstable.
The argument you're making, I'm not arguing with you, I'm not disagreeing with you, but you're saying that it's a small percentage doesn't mean that it was fair. It has nothing to do with whether all those people were fairly.
What I'm saying
labeled.
is you have no information that it wasn't done fairly.
I didn't criticize it. I simply said
you're
it concerned
throwing it out like
me.
there's something crazy going on.
Well, the only
said that
thing
we need to watch it.
We got to take a break, but the only thing I'm going to say about it, Cuomo is crazy.
Well, I rather doubt that the governor of New York was sitting down going through people's mental files trying to decide who was unstable.
I think
I
he's
don't
mentally
doubt that.
unstable.
I wouldn't
Wait a
doubt
minute.
that.
I think Cuomo is mentally unstable, and he's going to try to make
When you
any
think about
decision.
someone like de Blasio, New York City mayor, I certainly wouldn't put it past him to go through and target people.
Well, wait a minute. I think I have Cuomo.
Besides, Lois Lerner targeted people, Franklin.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash.
Turn your car into cash at Check Into Cash.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500.
At Check Into Cash, you get the most for your car, and we make it quick, easy, and confidential.
Stop in for an auto title loan today or a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH.
Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Guns, guns, and more guns. That's right, folks. U.S. Money Shops has just received a large shipment of pre-owned Glock 22s, 23s, and the awesome Beretta 8040D Cougar. These guns are law enforcement trade-ins that start at just $379.99 while supplies last. At U.S. Money Shops, there's no shortage of guns, so if you're looking for a great deal on a newer pre-owned gun, then check us out first.
Buy or sell or coin today, the better way at U.S. Money Shops.
Visit usmoneyshops.com for the location nearest you.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it. Dig it, dig it.
Saturday mornings, tune in to The Wrestling Mat, hosted by Ron Moore. Ron and his guests will review Cleveland, Bradley, and Walker Valley's wrestling programs each week during the season. Tune in from 9 to 9:45 a.m. to hear Cleveland's only high school wrestling review show. The Wrestling Mat airs every Saturday, 9 a.m. to 9:45 a.m., only on WOOP FM.
Hello, my name is Andy Figglestaller with Ed Jacobs & Associates. We are an employee benefit and insurance broker in business for the past 20 years. The new healthcare law, also known as Obamacare, has finally arrived. The law is complex and the choices are confusing. You have questions, we have the answers. It is our passion to find cost-effective solutions for every client. The solutions will be different for every person or business. Let our knowledge, experience, and passion go to work for you. Contact us today and let us assist you through this process. Our phone number is 423-473-0202, or you can find us on the web at edjacobs.com.
Dr. Christopher Chase, with Associates in Plastic Surgery, now offers his patients the convenience of a Cleveland office at 2350 North Ocoee Street. Dr. Chase specializes for the ladies in breast augmentation, including lifts, reconstructions, and reductions, also tummy tucks or mommy makeovers, and facial rejuvenation, including facelifts, eyelids, brows, nose, and he also offers Botox procedures. Check out Dr. Christopher Chase. He is certified by the American Board of Surgery, the American Board of Plastic Surgery. He's a member of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons and the American Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery. Check their website out at aprs.md. That's aprs.md. Call for your convenient appointment in Cleveland at 624-0021. 624-0021. 2350 North Ocoee. That's Dr. Christopher Chase.
If you're looking for a home, apartment, or office space, Jones Properties provides residential and commercial properties in the heart of the Southeast that will fulfill any need. Plus, Jones Properties is one of the fastest growing firms in the area, which offers you more security. When you're ready for a home, apartment, or in need for commercial office space, it makes sense to call Jones Properties first at 472-4000. Plus, you can get additional information by logging on to the website at www.jonesproperties.biz. Jones Properties is also looking to invest in properties. So if you have a property that you need to sell, call the professional team at Jones Properties first. They'll help you find the perfect property for whatever your needs. Call today, 472-4000. And don't forget to keep up with Jones Properties on Facebook.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson on Whoop FM. Call 423-614-5553 to join in on the conversation. Now, back to Backfire.
All right, we're back live here in the studio. Backfire. Franklin Chancey and John Stanberry.
While we're here, Steve, we need to issue a little bit of a correction from last week.
I'm waiting.
I got reprimanded that we said something that was factually incorrect, and I think that's probably true. We talked about the funding for the Lake Forest Middle School last week, and that was an $18 million expenditure, and we at least implied that it was an $18 million school that they were talking about building. That's not accurate. Under the law, if the county commission raises $18 million to pay a $12 million school, there's an additional $6 million that has to go to the city because of the education funding formula. So that $18 million is a $12 million school plus the additional share that goes to the city for schools
33.
there.
Any capital outlay, they have to give 33% to the city. Now, let me say something, and you know, Franklin has corrected this because somebody complained, but let me just say, the people that complain about this kind of stuff, it still costs us $18 million to build a school. But my point is, that's the kind of hair splitting that a politician does. Oh, no. We're not actually spending $18 million. We're only spending $12 million.
Now, we need to be fair.
But you know what? You are spending $18 million. Whatever the law requires, it requires.
That wasn't the issue. We talked about
how much does the school cost?
We talked about 12. We talked about the fact that, well, wait a minute, we built this other school for $10 million and we built this one for 12. Why is this one going to cost 18?
That
was the only point that was made. It's not accurate that we're talking about building an $18 million
But it is
school.
Accurate that it's going to cost $18 million.
And that was not disputed.
I know, but the point here is the taxpayer has to come up with $18 million.
No question.
Well, you know, I think the first thing that the city and county government should come together on, if they're thinking about merging services, is no more lawsuits.
Well, but you get all kinds of stuff. Before the city built Mayfield, you had city school board members coming to the county commission and demanding that they build a new school, and the only reason they were doing it is to get their 33% so they would have enough to build Mayfield School.
Oh, my Lord. I got to ask you this question here. I'm going to get off on this. In Ferguson, the store owner that was robbed by Michael Brown.
Right.
How do you think he felt, you know, he was robbed by Michael Brown, and then his store was looted in honor of Michael Brown. So how do you think this poor guy felt?
Well, I imagine he feels terrible, and I feel terrible for him.
Well, not just him. You know, I brought up the young woman that has the bakery that, you know, her business was destroyed. Young black woman trying hard to make something out of her life.
You know, one of the mistakes that some of these, not everybody, let's be fair, not everybody who was protesting was out looting.
That's true.
But the people who did these acts of violence and that, the mistake they made is linking everything together. One act justifies another, and that's not really the case. And we have to be careful, too. You know, just what I said. The people who did this looting were horribly wrong, and they should be prosecuted for it, and they should be held accountable.
But there's about three...
The people who stood out there with protest signs and expressed their opinion
that's great.
should be commended for just doing what our society allows them to do,
but
which
there's
is
about
express their
3
opinion.
actual factions here that you have to break
Sure.
out. You've got the people Franklin's talking about that are exercising their constitutional right to dissent. And that's really one of the strengths of our country. But then you've got the just common crooks and thugs who took advantage of a situation to loot and steal. But then you've got a third group, and that's the agitators. That's the people who have a political agenda.
Al Sharpton's.
Well, not just Al Sharpton. You've actually got anarchists that invaded this. You've got Muslim groups that invaded this with ties to terrorists. You've got the Black Panthers that were involved. 2 of them were arrested trying to plot to blow up the arch. So you have really subversive groups who came in and actually stirred this up and made, I wouldn't doubt at all that you could have an anarchist take a baseball bat, break a window out, knowing that there would be people that would see that window and take the opportunity to go in and loot. So the looter may not have even been the first one to break the window. The agitator may have broken the window.
Did you see the picture by chance of the lady that was looting a store that had a child with her? I mean, this was about a 4-year-old. Unbelievable.
Well, let me give something too. I want to say something since we brought up Ferguson and the New York City case. I want to give something a little perspective. Every year, there are 150 U.S. law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. 150. That is one police officer killed in the line of duty roughly every 2 days. On average, over the last decade, there have been 58,261 assaults against law enforcement each year, resulting in 15,658 injuries. In the past 10 years, an average of 1 death every 58 hours has occurred of a police officer. There were 100 law enforcement officers killed in 2013. In September 11th, 72 officers were killed alone in New York City. New York City has the largest number of slain officers, while Texas is the largest state with the number of slain officers. Now, for perspective, while citizens have been rallying in Ferguson, Missouri, and New York in just the past month, a dozen police officers have been killed across our country by murderous thugs or unfortunate accidents in the line of duty. We just need to keep that in mind. There's a little perspective that has to be viewed here as well.
Well, I can't imagine President Obama and Eric Holder trying to say things that, to me, are going to upset the police force.
Well, you got, just like I
jobs.
said, over the last month or two, you've had a dozen, what did I say, 10 or 12 officers die. Has the president called any of those families?
I mean,
to me, let's look at New York,
okay,
for example.
Majority of police officers are black there.
Well, I don't know if they are or not.
52% of them are black.
But here's what I know there. In the last 15 years, there have been 77 people killed in New York who were unarmed by the police. What does that mean? I don't know, but I would say that's something worth talking about and looking into. I know that, the Garner case in particular, what's the really concerning part there? New York's had a rule in effect for 15 years that the police officers can't do the thing that was done in that case. They have their own rule to that effect. But it turns out that about 80 times a year, police officers violate that rule, and hardly any of them have been held accountable for that.
Well, let me.
So, what message does that send?
Well, frankly, first off, when I said that these officers that were killed in just the month of November, let me read you one of them. Constable Robert White, El Paso County Constable's Office, Precinct 1. White was fatally injured while struggling with a suspect during a security detail. So that's an unarmed suspect, and yet he was able to kill this officer. So the idea, unarmed, as far as a gun or a knife, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not the aggressor, that you're not the superior. But by the same token, let me say something. Now, you talk about getting into a really big discussion, and Franklin probably won't like this, but what killed the young man in New York City was progressive government, because he was selling cigarettes. That was his crime. It's the overregulation and the over-control of the U.S. population that criminalized an activity that shouldn't have been criminalized in the first place. So while the police officer was the instrument of his death, the actual murderer was big progressive government.
I think
this would largely be a law passed in 1920.
I don't care.
That's big progressive government.
What was the point of it, Franklin? What was his crime? His crime was not paying cigarette taxes.
Sure. I think he'd been arrested 6 times for this.
But no, wait a minute, Steve. What I'm saying is his crime was not selling cigarettes. They don't care about you selling the cigarettes. It's not paying the tax on the cigarettes.
I understand.
Sure, and there were merchants in the area that were complaining about
$6 a pack.
They had to pay the tax.
$6 a pack.
So the point is, it's the high tax, high regulation of progressive government that led to his death.
That's an amazing leap to link.
It's not a leap at
somebody
all,
dying
Franklin. Had it not been illegal,
he didn't die
dead.
because of that. He died because he refused to be arrested.
Well,
both of those deaths occurred from both of them refusing to do what the police asked them to do.
You've seen the video. There were 5-6 police officers there.
How big was he?
Yeah, this guy was huge.
Who stood there and watch the officer do the thing they're trained not to do.
What?
Well, I will tell you that. And look, I'm not
take him down, apprehend him. Let me tell you something. I was up here
the chokehold.
No, I was.
Wait a minute.
They're not allowed to do that.
Franklin, let me say something. He did not.
No,
and I don't want to get into the weeds here, because I do think that they probably should have stopped. But I will say, if you watch the video and you break it down, and there have been security people that have broken it down, the officer did not place him in a chokehold initially. He had him in an arm restraint. The boy struggled. The officer's arm did slip. When it slipped, it came up under his neck, and then he was in a chokehold. But he didn't initially place him in a chokehold.
The autopsy report conclusively established that he died as a result of the chokehold.
I didn't say that. What I said was the officer did not initially intend to put him in a chokehold.
Well, Franklin, did the guy have asthma?
And heart disease?
So what?
I mean,
did he die?
How can you say he died of a chokehold?
Look, here's all I'm saying. Well, first of all, I'm not a doctor, but that's what the autopsy said. Number one. But number two, what message does it send to these communities if the police aren't held accountable for violating their own rules?
I don't think they did anything wrong.
Well, they have a rule in their department. I didn't make the rule.
It was not a chokehold.
Well, they said it was.
No, he put him in an arm restraint, and it did slip in the struggle. But that's part of the point, too. Had he not been struggling, he probably wouldn't have slipped.
Look, John, I get the concept that everybody in theory should always do what the police says immediately.
And then find an attorney.
But by the same token, that doesn't mean the police can do anything.
I don't disagree with you, Frank, but here's my point. Are you going to be the one to make a list of what type of criminals they let walk away?
Well, I don't think there's any question here that this was a administrative misdemeanor.
What else goes on the list?
That's why we have elections.
Hold your thought. We got a call. I want to see what they're going to talk about. Go ahead, caller. You're live.
I just want to know that is he dead? Does he die if he stops when the police officer says?
No, he does not.
That's it.
Both of these deaths came from someone not resisting arrest. That's all. Bottom line.
If you stop when a police officer says stop, if you respect what the police officer says, exactly like half of us were brought up to do, none of this takes place.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Have you ever argued with a police officer about a speeding ticket or anything?
No, sir.
Have any of you guys done it?
No, I always said, I'm sorry, I did it, I shouldn't have been doing it, and they've always been very gracious. Now, sometimes I got a ticket, sometimes they appreciated me being honest.
Now, I got stopped one time at 3 miles an hour over the speed limit up in Bristol, Virginia. I just crossed the state line. I was doing 3 miles an hour over the speed limit. Then I had to follow the police officer down to some place to pay this crazy fine and all this, which it was pretty much a trap. But I did have a few things I said about it before I left. And, I was smart enough to know how far I could go. I can tell you that. But I respected it. I went and paid the fine and went on. It was not right.
Well, I can tell you coming up, and I've always tried to do this. I've always tried to basically beat myself up for them because there's no reason to argue with them. You're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
I got pulled over going up Monteagle Mountain. As soon as I saw the guy and I saw him start out, I just braked pretty hard, pulled off, and within about 100 yards, I was on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And he came up beside me. He asked what I was doing. I said, look, been at the state party meeting in Nashville. I'm trying to get home. I'm tired. It's late. I was driving too fast. I'm sorry. He said, well, why'd you pull over so quick? And I said, well, there wasn't any reason in me making you run me down because it's clear that I was breaking the law. And he looked at me a minute and he said, I'm not going to write you a ticket because you didn't make me chase you. I appreciate it. Don't do it again. And I thanked him, and I appreciated him being nice. But the reason I got out of that ticket is because I bent over backwards to be cooperative.
Let's take another call. Go ahead, caller. You're live.
Hey, have either one of y'all rode with a police officer?
I have.
Yep.
All right. I was fixing to say, I got a buddy of mine in Cleveland that I ride with and whatever. If you just ride with them old boys, you'll see a little bit of what they have to deal with.
Well,
it's an impossible task.
I work with police officers all the time.
Right.
And I'll tell you, there are good police officers, smart police officers, and there are police officers who are not very wise. And there's a huge difference in the way they conduct their jobs.
You're right.
And I will tell you, those good ones, they look for ways and find ways to avoid problems like this. Right. And they look for ways to keep citizens out of trouble.
But
there are ones who don't.
But Franklin, that's the point, though. It's getting the Michael Brown case.
Yes.
Michael Brown pushed that every step of the way.
Every step.
And so for the Al Sharptons, and more damaging for the Eric Holders and the President Obama to criticize the police in a situation like that, how do you ask an officer to risk his life every year when he's going to be criticized in that kind of blatantly obvious situation? There was nothing he could have done to have prevented that, short of letting the guy get away, which his job is to not let the guy get away.
And as I was mentioning before, one of the problems in the Ferguson situation is the way in which different issues have overlapped with each other and become intermingled.
Well, that's the president and the attorney general that started that whole deal.
No, the president and the attorney general didn't decide that there would be 2 African-American officers out of 50 in a town that's 80% African-American.
Well, maybe,
they didn't decide
Maybe
that.
the Democratic elected officials who run the entire town should be more open to minorities.
Let's take another call.
My point
real
is
quick.
there's an issue in that community. Now, that may not have anything to do with what happened
I want to talk to you more about that. Let's take this call. Go ahead, caller.
Hey, I got cut off. This is how I tell people. Jesus had the whole world picked from, and he picked 12 disciples. And Peter cut your ear off, and you had doubt Thomas, and Judas was in the crowd. There's always going to be a Judas in the crowd. Ain't nothing we can do about it.
All right, caller. Thank you for calling.
Well, he's right. Here's what happens. You have a president and you have a Department of Justice that instead of looking at the vast majority of these officers that do a wonderful job, instead of talking about the 150 who sacrifice their lives every year to keep us safe and keep an orderly society, they pick out a couple of bad people to criticize.
Well, I actually heard the president praise the overwhelming number of police officers.
Well, Franklin,
he sent
they all quit.
He sent 3 individuals from the White House to represent the White House at Michael Brown's funeral. That sends a message to police officers everywhere. You've got this guy was cleared, Darren Wilson was cleared by a grand jury, but yet the Justice Department says they're still investigating. That sends a message.
What is Eric Holder investigating?
He's trying to figure out a way to punish this guy. In other words, it's a mob mentality, and unfortunately, our attorney general is perfectly willing to sacrifice a individual to satisfy his mob.
You know, they talk about cleaning up. First of all, how in the world can we respect our president and Eric Holder when they run around with someone like
Al Sharpton?
Al Sharpton. How can we respect them, Franklin? I'm going to ask you at point blank. How can we respect those two guys if they're having anything to do with Al Sharpton?
Well, the purpose of that was to try and get the violence under control.
Now, wait a minute.
Which was our first priority.
I'm glad you brought that up because last night we had an attack in a Jewish community center on a Jewish student praying in the center.
New York.
And the police, on the video, you see over and over and over again trying to get this guy to drop the knife. He had just stabbed this boy in the head and was yelling anti-Semitic comments. Finally, he lunged at a police officer and they shot him. They're being criticized for that. Now, this is the same Jewish community center that about 18 years ago, they had Jewish people killed in the street by a mob who was incited by none other than Al Sharpton. And yet the president deems Al Sharpton the guy to bring to the White House as his lead on race relations.
How in the world can anybody respect this president running around with somebody like this?
Well, when the president gave his campaign speech,
you know what Al
no.
Sharpton reminds me of when he's around President Obama? What was that preacher's name that Obama was going to for 20
Jeremiah
years?
Wright.
Jeremiah Wright. I see that when I see this come together.
Let me ask you a question. When the president gave a very famous now campaign speech where he talked about the fact that there are communities where he feels unsafe walking through those neighborhoods and that African Americans bore some responsibility for what happened themselves and they needed to take responsibility for that. Did you ignore that?
Can I respond to that? How would you feel if you were a white policeman and you had to go in some of these black areas in response to crime being committed? You would rather have black policemen that could go in there and handle it. I don't think that they want to do this.
During the same time frame that we had Ferguson exploding, you had an unarmed white man killed by a black police officer. Did the president comment on that? And by the way, Franklin, when we're talking about, you get all defensive of the president, we're not really openly criticizing him directly. What we're saying is his choice of Al Sharpton. Wait a minute, let me ask a question. Had he appointed and brought Andrew Young to the White House to reach out to the Ferguson protesters,
yes,
would anybody have complained?
Been right there with him.
Andrew Young has no authority.
He's a black civil rights leader. He was at the side. He was at the side of Martin Luther King, and you're telling me he wouldn't have been a better choice than Al Sharpton?
Al Sharpton, whether you like it or not,
he's a crook and a criminal.
Was not an employee of the federal government.
Franklin, neither.
How many times have you been in the White House?
You don't want to answer that. Andrew Young, there were plenty of black leaders that this president could have reached out to touch base with the Ferguson people, and he chose the biggest con man, the biggest inciter of violence in the black community today. That tells you all you need to know.
Do you think that Al Sharpton was going to Ferguson anyway? Do you?
Why doesn't the president castigate him for going and saying, stay away?
Yeah.
Like a lot of the black people actually living in Ferguson did. They actually asked him to get out of there.
Okay.
But the president makes him his envoy. So even the people in the black community who are trying to distance themselves from someone like him, the president cut their legs out from under them.
I just think it's going to be a rough 2 years coming up.
Polling shows race relations under this president worse than before he took office.
I mean, it's amazing to me what's going on. I mean, it's amazing to me that you've got the issues.
Well, it is true that they're looking into some issues that were not being looked into before. I don't know if that's what you mean by race relations are poorer or not.
I'm telling you, the polling, they asked people and they said, do you think relations between the races are better or worse? And they all say worse. The majority say worse.
I think so. I mean, I personally think with
he
what's
hasn't
going
made
on
anything
right now,
better. He's made it worse.
I would say that a lot of the inflammatory race issues have been brought up by white people.
Really? You mean the white people who tried to vote in Maryland and the armed thugs from the Black Panthers menaced them, and then this attorney general
the Black Panthers are being prosecuted by this Justice Department?
Not those two. They were already actually convicted, and he overturned it and dropped the charges.
Franklin, they continuously bring up where they were discriminated about when they were young. They see this. And you know what? The world has changed
Well,
a whole
the
lot
pres-
since
the
they were
president-
young.
That's the problem, Steve. The world hasn't changed everywhere.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has, Franklin.
Now, let me see if I got this
remember
straight.
the day. I remember the day that I went to high school, and the blacks came to our school. I remember the first day it happened, and I remember us working together, and I remember there's some problems in there.
Is no
and I
question
remember
that
some of the
our
black
community
people
handled
that
it a
led
lot
in
better
our
than a lot of
schools.
places
So
did.
let me make sure I
And
understand
we
this,
worked
Franklin.
out, and everything worked out in our community. It's a great community.
Here's a black guy who was let in with really substandard grades to Occidental College and then Columbia and then Harvard, elected to the Senate, elected to the presidency, but somehow the world has not been good to him or fair for him.
Who said that?
He did.
No, he didn't.
We just discussed, he talked about how growing up he understands this. Lord, he's been one of the most blessed people in the world.
What he said was he understood what it's
Based
like.
on what? He
The
got
fact-
everything given to him.
You know,
by
First
the way,
of all, John, that is just about the stupidest
Franklin,
thing
it's
you've
not
ever
at all.
said.
Then show me his grades,
No,
how he earned
let
his
me tell
admission
you
to Harvard
exactly
Law.
how stupid it is.
Show me where he earned his admission to Harvard Law.
It says everything that you need to know about the credibility of your opinions on this, that you think the editor of the Harvard Law Review
who
got
wrote,
it by
not a, who
affirmative
wrote
action.
not a single
That is the
who
dumbest
wrote,
thing
Franklin,
you've ever
he wrote
said.
not a single review the entire time he was
That is
there.
the
Not
dumbest
one review.
thing
Not
you've
one
ever
review,
said.
Franklin. Show me one thing he did while he was head
number
editor.
one position in the entire
Tell me-
nation
show
for
me
a
what
law
he ran.
student you think was because of affirmative action.
Franklin, he didn't write a single review while he was editor of the Harvard Law Review. No other editor of the Harvard Law,
mind-bogglingly
Franklin,
stupid,
not a
and it
single
and
other
frankly,
editor,
John, it does reveal
not
a
a
bias in
single
your
other
opinion.
editor of the Harvard Law Review has never written a review.
It's totally absurd.
By the way, folks, let me end with
Totally
one thing.
absurd.
Let me end with
No,
one
you
thing.
don't end. You
This
try to
is-
end every week.
This is
Let's end on what you just said. The President of the United States
has been a blessed man.
got affirmative
He is-
action.
I didn't
and that's
say
how
that.
He was
As a matter
the
of fact,
editor of that.
Franklin,
No,
I
that's
never
what
said
you're
affirmative
implying.
action. No, I didn't. You brought affirmative action up. I didn't. So quit putting words in people's mouths.
No,
I'm
you
sorry
imply
that the facts don't meet
that
for
the
you.
president has somehow been given a gift.
He has
by
been given
you-
a gift
by white
He has-
America.
no,
This is
by
what you really mean.
academia, by liberal progressive academia. The man did not earn his way, and you know it, and you can't prove it because he won't release his
You
records.
don't get selected
Then release
editor
the
of the
records.
Harvard Law Review because of your color.
Really,
John.
Franklin?
Yes.
So,
that's right.
so you get an editor of the Harvard Law Review who doesn't write a single review, and somehow that's defendable by
It
you.
does not happen.
Why didn't he
John.
write a review? Why didn't he, like every other editor
First of all,
before
I have
him?
no idea if what you're saying is true or false.
He didn't write a single
and because
review.
you probably got it on Fox
He
News,
didn't
so
write
I
a
doubt its
single
credibility
review.
to begin with.
By the
but
way-
number two, it's so patently absurd that it doesn't even merit any discussion.
Then let's see his
It's
admission
ridiculous.
papers.
You know what?
Then show me the admission papers.
I just
Franklin.
wish we had more time to talk about Gruber this week. We hadn't even had a chance to talk about
Well,
the architect of Obamacare yet.
I'm so
Let
sorry
me
we
read
missed out
one
on
thing.
that far.
Let me read one things to you, folks. See
Oh,
if
you got to get the last word. Is
I
this
do
like,
have to. See if you like this. Potato sausage soup, firecracker slaw, California chef salad, all-natural Jamaican jerk chicken wings, sweet potato, black bean bake, sautéed local greens, gemelli Alfredo, sliced pineapple. That's Tuesday's menu at President Obama's children's school. That's the food that his two girls get to eat at the Sidwell Friends School. So all you kids out there enjoying Michelle Obama's food at your school, enjoy.
Because John pines for the day when he loved his school lunch.
No, he pines for the day when the government gets their nose out of our local business.
Well, all I can say before we end here is, if you don't want a heavy presence in your neighborhood, you should not have looted and burned it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson, John Stanberry, and Franklin Chansey. Catch them again on Whoop FM at noon today and every Wednesday morning from 7:30 to 8:30. Now, back to more music on Whoop FM.